Recording. Okay, so tonight I kind of this is kind of something that I enjoy doing. Don't do as much as I'd like. So I come with a full disclaimer that I'm not the greatest at this, but I do think the Bible has a lot to teach us about having meals together, gathering around the table, and also just in general showing hospitality to others and inviting them into our lives. So this teaching is called Come to the Table, and we're going to talk about building community and showing love through food and hospitality. And so a thing I'm probably going to emphasize in here is, it's not primarily about the food. The food is part of this this concept of inviting people, including people, and welcoming people into community with us, but we also don't want to get too hung up on that. It's a tool that we can use to welcome people and love people and invite them to experience the blessings of communing with Christ and being a part of his kingdom. So those are some things we can be thinking about when we are looking at this topic. So the first thing I kind of thought about when I was thinking about having, preparing a table, gathering around the table was that's important for us to understand why the Bible, how the Bible talks about the table, and what's the significance of having meals, and having what's the table represent. So the first passage that I really thought of when I thought of this was in Psalm 23. So I'll just be reading two scripture passages tonight, and you can kind of follow along if you want to. Don't have them up on the screen. So Psalm 23, it's talking about, how God is leading him. This is from David, and how, he's providing for him, taking care of him. And his presence basically is what this is about. So in Psalm 23, we see that the table symbolizes God's provision and his presence. So I'll just go ahead and read it. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He takes me to lush pastures. He leads me to refreshing water. He restores my strength. He leads me down the right paths for the sake of his reputation. Even when I must walk through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff reassure me. You prepare a feast before me in plain sight of my enemies. You refresh my head with oil. My cup is completely full. Surely your goodness and faithfulness will pursue me all my days, and I will live in the Lord's house for the rest of my life." So we see here that even when bad things are happening, God is providing here, and he's providing both his presence and provision for what David needs. Just even the smallest of needs that we have as people, that God's providing that for us. And I think we can share that provision with others out of our abundance, and what we have, we can bring to others. And not only food, but we can also bring comfort, our presence, our relationship. We can bring listening ears to people. So we see also that the table symbolizes comfort, and that food and relationship can come together at the table. So those are some really key elements to this, that it's a really great place for us to commune with other people and just get to know them and have deeper fellowship. And it's a place that you can make people feel welcome and just show love to them. And it's a place that we can just gather and connect with each other. And we already talked about how food is part of the experience, but it's not the whole experience. And we'll talk about kind of keeping that simple so that we can focus on the fellowship aspect. And then also the table is a place of remembrance of Jesus Christ and what he has done for us. And we'll talk some more about that in later slides. So one of the things that we can do to minister to people is that we can be inclusive and welcoming to others. We can be the person that invites and initiates relationship. It's pretty easy thing to do. Just to invite people into our lives. It can be challenging sometimes, and it can be uncomfortable for us, but I think that that's one way we can love people and make disciples. So if you look at the passage in John, it may seem a little bit of a different passage. It may not directly be talking about feeding, when he says feed my sheep, not necessarily talking about food, but it's one way that we can love people. And so Jesus is talking to Simon, and it says, Jesus said a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was distressed that Jesus asked him a third time, do you love me? And said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus replied, feed my sheep. So, but in this process, one way we can do that is we can physically feed people, but we can also invite people into our lives and feed them with the scriptures, feed them the love of Christ, and give them, we care for their physical needs and their spiritual needs as well. And one way that we can do this, we do want to keep it simple. We don't want to overdo it, try to be too fancy to where people either feel uncomfortable or to where you're worn out by the time the people get there, having prepared the meal. So that's something that we can do to make it a more inviting atmosphere. Is we're calm, we're enjoying being with the people, and we're focusing on that and making them feel comfortable and cared for, not for everything to be perfect. I think that's something that can happen a lot of times. And so welcoming others is all about your attitude. And Jesus set an example for us. So he included people in his life who were outcasts. They were not the most important in society. They were kind of just everyday people like his disciples. He had a meal with them. He had many meals with them. And then also he ate with sinners, and he got criticized for the kind of people that he hung around and included at the table with him, and the people that he really was reaching out to and just teaching them the things of God. So just like Jesus, our attitude should be of meekness and service. So when we look at Philippians 2, verses 5-8, it says, you should have the same attitude toward one another that Christ Jesus had, who, though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God to be something to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking on the form of a slave, by looking like other men, and by sharing in human nature. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. So we see here his attitude of making himself a slave, being a person of service and focusing on others, and just being so obedient to God and loving people. And so I think we want to be aware also that we're people that have, we have been the ones in need at sometimes, and that we don't have it all together all the time. So we want to come in there with an attitude of humility, and that we're here to serve others. We're not here to show people how great we are, but we're here to show people how great Jesus is and how great the Father is. So when we're inviting people, when we're engaging with people while they're there, I think we for the most part, when we're serving, we want to lay down our own concerns and engage the hurt that people might be experiencing in this world, that are going to be affecting pretty much everyone that we encounter. Everyone's going through something. So not that we can't ever share what's going on in our lives. I don't mean that, but our focus should be on really creating an environment where people feel comfortable sharing, so that we can love and minister to people in the way that Jesus would have us minister to them. So another aspect of this is being the includer. I think all of us have experienced the pain of rejection. And so another way for us to kind of help heal that wound that everybody has is we need to be the person that invites and includes, that doesn't leave people out that normally would get left out, that wouldn't be invited to a social gathering or a meal. So I think that we can be part of including those who are just generally on the outside. And I think that's being like Christ to do that. So Jesus welcomed us when others rejected us. So I think it's a way that we can, pay it forward to those who we can show them how Jesus did that for us by the way we treat them. So when we're looking at what kind of people should we invite to gather around the table with? And there's more than one answer here. So we're going to look at a few different passages. So first of all, our focus now, we won't only invite people that are, on the lower end of the social totem pole. We'll have various people that we're going to encounter and interact with and invite into our lives, but our focus should be that we're not doing it to gain something from others. We're focusing on inviting and gathering with people in order to give. So when we look at Luke 14, this is a very good example of pretty clear directions on how we should, what kind of people we should be focusing on and ministering to. And then when they're talking about, Jesus is talking to people about, who should be the most important person at a dinner party, basically, or at the table. And then he said also to the man who had invited him, when you host a dinner or a banquet, don't invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, so you can be invited by them in return and get repaid. But when you host an elaborate meal, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Then you'll be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So this verse is kind of saying, your focus should be on inviting those that don't get invited, like we just talked about. So people that can't repay you, because that also shows the love of Jesus. We really, we can't repay him for what he's done for us. So we can do that for others to show that example. And, we're naturally going to have those family events where we invite family over, and that will be its own blessing. But for us to be rewarded and to have people come into the kingdom, we kind of have to reach out to those people who really are in need of being invited and welcomed in. We also see that having a meal together is a great way for Christians to commune and bond together with each other. So we see, I'm sure there's a lot of examples of this in the New Testament, but one pretty simple explanation of how people did this is in Acts 2 verse 42, and just talking about how the early Christians met together. What kind of things were they doing when they got together? And so it says they were devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. So that was not the only thing they were doing, but it was definitely part of that deep fellowship and communing together. And they were teaching. They were doing all kinds of things. And that included the breaking of bread, having meals together, and that does bond you together with people. It's a shared experience. Another way, another avenue for outreach around the table is providing meals to the community as a whole. So we want to think more holistically. We see one example of Jesus doing this in Matthew 14, and so he had just, he was grieving the death of his cousin John the Baptist, and he has been ministering. And it says, now when Jesus heard this, he heard about his cousin, he went away from there privately in a boat to an isolated place. But some people had heard about it. It says, but when the crowd heard about it, they followed him on foot from the towns. So he was trying to get away and get kind of some rest and be able to grieve privately. But we see that he really cares for people even when he's grieving. Verse 14 says, as he got out, he saw a large crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. When evening arrived, his disciples came to him saying, this is an isolated place, and the hour is already late. Send the crowds away so that they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves. But he replied, they don't need to go. You give them something to eat. They said to him, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. Bring them here to me, he replied. Then he instructed the crowds to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. He gave them to the disciples, who in turn gave them to the crowds. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up the broken pieces left over, 12 baskets full. Not counting women and children, there were about 5,000 men who ate. So not only does this passage show us that Jesus was doing miraculous things by multiplying small amounts of food into very large amounts of food for a large amount of people, but he was also caring for he cared for their spiritual needs. First of all, he laid aside the grief he was having over his cousin, and when he saw the people in their need, he had compassion on them and healed them. So he took care of their spiritual needs and their physical needs, doing that. And then something as simple as they were all hungry and they were going to have to go home. The ministry was going to have to stop. So he says, they don't need to go home now. We can just feed them here, basically. So that also increased their faith and was another opportunity to bless them and minister to them and show them that God cares for their needs. And he did that with the same heart the Father had for the people. And then also we see that Jesus also desires the church to have the kind of communion with him that is like that we would commune with him and dine with him. So we see it's in the context of I believe the Laodicea church, but in Revelation 3:20 it says, listen, I am standing at the door and knocking. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into his home and share a meal with him and he with me. So he just wants that deep type of communion that we would be able to. It's showing that's the kind of relationship that he wants to have with us, that we could have in that meal with him. He's showing that he really thinks that that's an important intimate act to have someone in your home to dine together, and that he wants to have that kind of relationship with his people and his church. So we should definitely invite Jesus to have that level of communion with us in our own lives. And so in light of, we're talking about giving rather than receiving, I found this quote in one of the books that I've been reading on this. And it says, remember that when you leave this earth, you take with you nothing that you received. Fading symbols of honor, trappings of power, but only what you have given, a full heart enriched by honest service, love, sacrifice, and courage. And that's a quote from Francis of Assisi. So basically we're talking about, we're kind of reiterating the verses about, don't invite people that are going to, repay you, because those are not really, those are good benefits to have on earth, but in the long run, what's really going to matter is what we give. So in the next life, what's going to last, what's really going to mean something is the things that we poured out to others, and not just, the honor that the world wants to give us, but really the things that we had to give to the world and out of love for God and Jesus Christ. So those are the things that we want to be focusing on. So also we can any meal, anytime we can have a meal, or well, even outside of meals, but especially we see the example of when we get together and we eat and we drink together, we can do that in remembrance and thankfulness of what Jesus Christ has done for us. And so I know we did communion this last Sunday, so I'll try not to spend too much time here, but it is kind of important for us to realize that this is another purpose of coming together and eating, is that we can remember Jesus Christ. So when we look at 1 Corinthians 11:23-26, it says, for I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night in which he was betrayed, took bread. And after he had given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, he also took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this every time you drink it in remembrance of me. For every time you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." So of course, most of us know that, this was just a regular meal they had together. So we can either, symbolically do that through, a cracker and wine, or when we get together for a meal, or we have a meal just with our families, we can always give thanks and just and be remembering in remembrance of Jesus Christ, and really be thinking about the sacrifice he gave for us, so that, not only that we have this meal, but we also have everlasting life because of his sacrifice. I think we can, there's always that to be thankful for. And I think, meals are something you do regularly. So as many times as you can remember that, I think that really helps you get a good focus in your life. We also, if we look at the passage, the same event in Luke 22, that's where this part of the event is recorded. We can also look forward to the day then we will dine and drink with Jesus in the future, in the age to come. So I think there's also this hopeful element of it, not just looking to the past of what's happened, which is some great things that Jesus has done for us, but also we look forward to the coming kingdom when we eat. So I think that's a very wonderful thing to focus on when we're eating and we're communing with each other and with the Lord. So if we look at Luke 22:15-18, it says, "And he said to them, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Then he took a cup. After giving thanks, he said, Take this and divide it among yourselves. For I tell you that from now on I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. Then he took the bread, and after giving thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, This is my body, which is given to you. So do this in remembrance of me." Okay, so he was saying, this is something for you to look forward to. So what a wonderful thing to think about, dining and drinking with Jesus in the future kingdom, and really having that full fellowship, seeing him face to face. That's something just wonderful to remember. So great things to think about here. So now we're going to think about some practical ways, and these are just a few ideas, and I'd love to hear more. So what are some ways we can do this? How can we share the table with others and reach out to people, invite them into our lives, our homes, or wherever we happen to be able to have that kind of fellowship with people around a table? It's going to look different depending on, where you live, what you have available to you, but I think we can all find ways to do that. So some ideas that I had were, have a potluck or barbecue with neighbors, make it very simple. Don't, you didn't need to be, the best cut of steaks or whatever, just, can even do, if you're on a budget, everybody bring a pack of hot dogs, everybody bring some buns, and then bring some chips, and then that's it. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. But just inviting your neighbors, the people that live around you, they're part of your community. They're there and you can affect them. And another thing we talked about, we can have deeper fellowship with other people in the church by doing that. And we have the challenge of being online, but I want to challenge us to think of it as not a barrier, but maybe even a lower pressure thing that we could, we can each have a meal, each have our own meals, and we can just get together on Zoom and hang out for a dinner party if we want sometime. And you don't even have to cook for someone else. You can each have what you like to eat, and just you can still get on Zoom and hang out. So I would encourage everybody to try to do that sometime in the near future. Another simple thing, if you're not wanting to prepare anything, if that's not something you're able to have people to your home or anything, you can also meet a friend for coffee or lunch. Let someone take care of the logistics, and you just show up and be present for your friend or acquaintance or whoever that you want to get to know or have a time with someone that you want to minister to. could also meet at the park for a simple picnic. And this is especially a good one for people that have children and they need an outlet to go play so that you can really engage the other person. Just bring simple foods up there and just hang out and let the kids play. You could also, we talked about how Jesus, we may not really have 5,000 people come to be ministered to, that we can just bring meals to, but we also have, most of us in our communities have a soup kitchen or something similar, or community meals that we could get involved with. And you know, after you serve the meal, you can help serve the meal, and then you can start engaging with people and hear their story and get to know them a little bit. It could be a good opportunity. So I would encourage that if that's something that is available to you in your community. You can also, you know, it's not really an opportunity to spend time with people, but also to use a meal to support people. You could bring a meal to a family or person who needs extra support, maybe someone going through a crisis, a death in the family, or they have a new baby that's taking, you know, that takes a lot of energy, and you know, can be very tiring. And also someone that is either having an illness or has recently had a surgery might need extra help, and so they can focus on other things and focus on healing or grieving or whatever the situation is, instead of having to worry about a meal that could really bless someone and help them feel closer to you and feel cared for in that moment. That's a good way to minister to people. And then kind of just on a everyday or, you know, a smaller scale, you could have a special themed meal with your family on a semi-regular basis. Make it something fun for your family. You know, a theme, you could do, you know, Mexican food one week, or you could do or maybe you just do it once a month or whatever. It's just something special and fun to connect your family together. So those are just some ideas. Love to hear more. And then here's a few books that if you want more ideas on how to connect with people around the table, but also just in general, how to do hospitality, examples of stories. These are a few books that I've read or looked at. And the first one's called Come and Eat by Brie McCoy. She has a lot of good stories and about how the table is, you know, different ways that God can work through you, and inviting people to gather around your table. And there's also recipes in that one. There's The Gospel Comes with a House Key by Rosaria Butterfield. And she talks about some really interesting ways that she's reached out to people in her neighborhood, and how it's pretty radical ways that she's been able to do that. A Meal with Jesus by Tim Chester is another one, and we'll have a little quote by him here at the end. And The Turquoise Table by Kristen Schell also focused on how you can reach out to people in your neighborhood specifically, and local community, and without it being too complicated. So those are just some ideas of things you can look at if you want to study this some more. All right, so I will end with this quote from A Meal with Jesus by Tim Chester. He says, and some of these points are debatable, but in general, I don't think that that the things Jesus was doing looks like the way that people are doing these things in the modern days here now. So hopefully that doesn't, you know, when it says Jesus didn't run projects, establish ministries, create programs, or put on events, at least, you know, not how we're doing it nowadays. He ate meals. If you routinely share meals and you have a passion for Jesus, then you'll be doing mission. It's not that meals save people. People are saved through the gospel message, but meals will create natural opportunities to share that message in a context that resonates powerfully with what you're saying. So it's just something to think about here at the end. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and we'll open it up for some discussion. Would love to hear everybody's thoughts. Okay. Looks like the Triggs, perhaps Jackson is the closest one. I'm gonna guess it's him that has the hand up.
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay, yeah, Laura. Love it. This is so good. And I just think that this message, like, we should be pasting this all over social media so every Christian knows about this concept, because it's so true and so valuable. And it's just, yeah, I don't know, you said it, it's all there. But I kind of have passion for this sort of thing. The people that live with me now know that I kind of am obsessive if I'm cooking for people. Sometimes I can get a little carried away, but it really does, open hearts and create opportunities for good discussion, to provide food and provide a comfortable place to hang out. And really interestingly, this is something fascinating. So, because we just moved Hannah's mom here, right? And she didn't have a whole ton of furniture with her. She was going to have to acquire stuff when she got here. And one of the things she didn't have was a table and chairs. And when we were first helping kind of unpack and get her house organized and stuff, it was just amazing how disorienting and how it didn't feel like a place that you live, being in a house that didn't have a table. It was really weird. And it almost felt like there was just nowhere to like gather. It was really interesting because she didn't have a coffee table either. So like even in the living room with like sitting on a couch, there's no coffee table. It just kind of, it had this strange feeling. And so all your stuff you described, just, it's real, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, just really great stuff. I can't say more good things about it. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for thinking of turning that into a presentation.
All right. Thanks, Jackson. It's very encouraging.
That was a great presentation, Laura. I was very moved, and I was very aware of that quote because I just read it online somewhere today and thought, oh, that's really a unique quote. And here I read it online and you presented it tonight. I really love that. And of course, I've experienced that too, just the openness of, meeting strangers even, and have had them at my table, regardless of where I lived. And I've also worked in soup kitchens and made sandwiches for the homeless. And just my heartbeat was for, the whole thing is loving on other people, whether they believe in your Jesus or not at the moment. They might, if you show, kindness, and then don't have a whole lot of strings attached to, the output. I think Jesus was just very genuinely, he was very much about people, and of course it was the presentation of the gospel, but he really cared for people, genuinely cared about their health. They cared about whether they had food and all that good stuff. And so, I would say he's the one that makes the lessons for us to glean. But this was so well done. And I applaud you for thinking about it and, bringing it to light. And it's very much part of, what we do with the gospel is, I read a scripture, I can't tell you where it's at right now, but in order to kind of like be friendly, like, you want friends, show yourself to be friendly, hospitable, open, aware, and don't live in a closed box, and fearful and, oh my God, look what's all that's going on in the world. I might get murdered if I invite somebody over. Well, definitely screen them, don't be a fool, but got any guns? Are you packing them? You're not getting in my home. I'm complicating this teaching. But yeah, use wisdom. But yeah, I just really think showing favor. And I used to go to this church, and I'll be honest with you, it took me a minute because I was a little bit spoiled, and it was like downtown East Washington, Indiana, where the least of these, my brethren, hung out, the homeless and stuff. And I'd be making sandwiches and stuff with my friend, and every Sunday these people came, and some of them came just to eat, but some of them stayed, and you just let that thing be. But I was always cooking with my friend Rita, and I'm like, Rita, whew. And it wasn't the best place in town, and I was just like, Lord, I got into it after a while, and I miss it now. I just miss that place. Of course, it's not there anymore, but at the time, you touch hearts, and you're able to communicate God's love to people. I just thought this was really well done. Thank you.
Donna. Appreciate it. Dan, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, Laura, I just gotta say, I mean, I wrote some whole bunch of stuff down, but a couple words just came to mind. Was really fresh. It just, it was like a breath of fresh air with a very practical and inspiring teaching.
Yes.
I just, it's encouraging, it's inspiring, and my mind was being flooded with memories because we used to make it a practice, both in California, in Indiana, and then in Oregon, because those are the places I moved to. And when we had a fellowship for a while, every week we started our fellowship at 6 o'clock with a potluck dinner. It got to be a lot of production, and but the fellowship exploded because people they came and they ate, and then at about 7:30, after everything was cleaned up, but from the moment they walked in, people were there. We all sat around, we ate, but the discussion was ongoing, and the spiritual discussions initiated and fired off, because when you eat and drink, you can't help but talk. And a lot of times it was during the meal that people were exposing their hearts and what was really bothering them, or what they were struggling with, or those things. Whereas if you just come in and you sit down and it's a formality, kind of the walls are up. So the food brought those walls down. People just came in, and it was vibrant. And I got to tell you, it's centered around a meal. And so I really think your teaching was just spot on. I love what you said, be an includer. And, we certainly all have felt the pain of rejection. That's what you said. But just be that person that reaches out and includes others. And whatever that might mean, it can take on so many different ways. But the last thing I was just going to say is, you had some wonderful ideas at the end. I thought they were really neat. Those were really inspiring. Just last week, it turns out Lori made a meal for a family that has 2 family members going through cancer. We have no idea who they are. We have no idea their name, but she's part of a local women's group, and word went out, and all the women and families responded, and people began providing meals. And that, I know that touches people. And we had people move in our neighborhood, and they're not neighbors in the sense of right near me, but they're all the way around the block and around the corner. But Lori made a coffee cake, and we walked over on Sunday, knocked on their door, and they'd been there 2 weeks, and just handed it to them. And all of a sudden we have friends. We've just, it was so simple. Make a coffee cake and give it to someone, and we have friends. So I'm going to be quiet. I don't want to teach you every
Thank you,
teaching.
Dan.
I just want to say, spot on. Great job.
Thanks, Dan. It's very encouraging, and it's encouraging to hear that you guys have done this, and how, you've seen that just really open up relationships. So it's not theoretical. This does work. So just following Jesus' example on this. Edgardo.
Yeah, I love the quote that you have mentioned a while back. I think it's based on 1 Timothy chapter 6, the one that Francis of Assisi said. Remember that when you leave this earth, you take with you nothing that you receive, fading symbols of honor, trappings of power, but only what you have given. A full heart enriched by honest service, love, sacrifice, and courage. Yeah, I remember 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 7. It says, we brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. Yeah. It's really a powerful tool to win people by, sharing them your food or inviting them to eat with you. It's kind of a holistic form of a ministry. you just on you not only feed them with spiritual things, but feeding them with physical things as well. And you are you are becoming, you know, you can easily evangelize them, you know, by inviting them to eat with you and by sharing food with them. Just like here in the Philippines, during the pandemic, we were able to evangelize people by holding crusades and sharing rice with them. We're able to win souls and bring more souls to the kingdom. And eating around a table with brothers and sisters can help you to have closer relationship with each one, with everyone. So the topic is very encouraging, and it makes me more motivated to continue on sharing food with other people, inviting them to eat with me, and to plant the gospel in their heart. And one of the things that I'm planning to do with the youth here is to have a tea party. We're going to have a tea party and eat together and then discuss the gospel. And this topic that you shared with us is one of the things that helped me to continue on making that plan, to pursue that plan, I mean, and win more soul through inviting people to eat with us. Thank you for the topic, Laura. It's good. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Edgardo. Encouraging words as well. And then I'm gonna go to Ray, and then we can stop the recording after that.
Well, your teaching reminded me of two things. One is in Hebrews 13, it says that do not neglect hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. So we never know what our hospitality may result in. And secondly, I was reminded of being present at an ordination of a minister, and she was not ordained as a prophet or a teacher or even a pastor. She was ordained with a ministry of hospitality. And so your teaching reminded me of her and of her ministry to be welcoming and encouraging and heartwarming. And I think that so your teaching was really great because it's so practical and so necessary, because how can we speak into people's hearts until we have them opened up? And they're not going to open up unless they know that they're loved. And how can we show them that without being hospitable? So thank you for your teaching, Laura.
Thanks, Ray. That's neat. I've not heard of anyone being ordained as a minister of hospitality, but that's really cool. I love that. Well, if you are watching this on YouTube, I hope you'll join us and have some fellowship with us, and hopefully get to know you more. And just look at the details in the notes.